Today's episode is sponsored by Shamless Security. They are a provider of cybersecurity solutions focused on the middle market. They combine human intelligence with technology to secure your investments. Shamless Security works with private equity firms, venture capital organizations, and family offices to identify the technologies and services needed to defend, fortify, and secure their acquisitions' cybersecurity posture. Partnering with Shamless Security enables organizations to close pathways of attack, remediate vulnerabilities, reduce risk while meeting compliance requirements. I've gotten to know Craig Sherwood at Shamless and some of the cyber M&A work they have done, and I'm very impressed. I want to thank them for sponsoring and hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Looking to buy, sell, or grow your business to position it for a sale? As the owner and managing partner of Sun Acquisitions, Dominic Rinaldi has personally been involved in over 300 M&A transactions. He has seen and done it all, consulting with large and small businesses across a broad range of industries. On M&A Unplugged, he'll interview buyers, sellers, and their advisors about their experiences scaling, selling, and acquiring businesses. On every episode, you will get key learnings, but most importantly, you will be better prepared for your own acquisition or sale. This is M&A Unplugged with your host, Dominic Rinaldi.
In 1962, Brian Lowenthal, on the heels of losing his job and buying a new home, decided to start a company, Wenesco, from scratch. Wenesco is a designer and manufacturer of soldering equipment for the electronics manufacturing sector. To say that Brian was a risk taker and true entrepreneur is an understatement. For the next 54 years, Brian would lead this business, building it to a worldwide brand. He faced a fair number of challenges along the way, but always maintained a successful business and a generous spirit. By all accounts, Brian was an incredibly organized man, paying attention to countless details. A fact that will bewilder you when you hear the story of what happened to his business after his death in 2016. You see, Brian was diagnosed with throat cancer in 2011, which left him many years to put his affairs in order. And he did when it came to all matters related to his personal life. But when it came to a succession for his business, this was a wholly different story. I am so pleased to have Brian's daughters, Wendi Ewalt and Leslie Chanel, with me today to discuss Wenesco and the events leading up to them ultimately selling the business after their father's passing. This is somewhat of a cautionary tale for anyone listening, but the silver lining is the business is moving forward and his legacy continues. Wendi and Leslie, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
So, Leslie and Wendi, let's go back to the beginning. What do you remember about your dad starting this business and building this business? When we had talked previously before the interview, you remember your dad, taking the risk early on to do this. And, so bring me through what you remember of the early parts of your dad building this business up to what it became.
I remember going in when I was in high school to start stuffing envelopes to advertise to the company and getting things sold. And my mom was in there too, and my dad obviously was there, and they were just instructing us, all right, in those days it was all paper. So just getting like 12 pieces or 15 pieces of paper stuffed in this envelope to be shipped off to potential customers. I remember that very clearly.
Leslie, you didn't really work in the business, is that right? But you have some memories of your dad and the business and growing up with your dad being a business owner?
Well, I know that I never worked in the business. I've worked as a independent contractor where he would just say to me, okay, Leslie, go ahead and see if you can find some companies that would want to sell wax melters. And I'd be like, okay, Dad, what do I do? He goes, just Google. So I said, okay, Dad. So I Googled and I tried to find different companies that made wax melters, which would be people who had candles or maybe people who did eye waxing for customers. And so I would just contact them all with this email that he created just for that. And then I would be able to get a commission every time I sold or had a company that would buy a wax melter. That was my part-time job for a few years, and it was fun.
So both of you really didn't have a lot of involvement in the business over the years. But I know then when your dad found out the news that he had cancer, Leslie, you had moved away from the area. But Wendi, you were really brought back into the business at that point in time, really not knowing a lot. And you were asked to sort of help, with office management. Can you describe what that was like coming back into the business and, what transpired from that point?
Sure. Well, I developed a career in recruiting. I was doing recruiting for temporary services. And then obviously when my dad got sick, he requested that I join him to run the business just in case something happened. And my duties, they were varied. We moved from one location to another and I helped with that. I was doing just a lot of compliance work that fell by the wayside, and working with the sales department, working with the shipping department, working with even a little bit of operations, and just kind of putting my hand in everything, thinking that in the future I was going to be a little bit more prepared for if something happened to my dad.
And so fast forward, your dad passed away in 2016, and you were now faced, both of you, with this business. But over the 5 years since your dad had learned that he had cancer, really hadn't put together a succession plan. And so can you talk a little bit about what that was like? Did you have a feeling like your dad should be doing this? And what kind of conversations were you having with him about potentially doing a succession plan and having things in place and in order? Because I think you both described to me that he really did a fabulous job on the personal side of his life, putting all the pieces together, so that was all taken care of.
Well, interestingly enough, when I thought about the business and when my dad would pass away, I thought that it was so tight that everything would just run just like it usually did. I had no idea that there was so many things that were left unmanaged. So I was like, well, in fact, the day that he passed away and Keith was asking about Wenesco, I'm like, well, first thought came to my mind was it's running fine. Why would anything be any different? And so I just figured, okay, everything's running fine. The business is successful. And that's how I thought. But obviously it's a little bit different.
And I was on the other end of it. And I was asking him, weekly, because, he was not looking good, and you could just, he was like not coming into work as much. And I was asking him all the time, Dad, we need some kind of a plan here. Especially, not even thinking that he might pass away, but he wasn't in as much. He wasn't at the office as much, although he was participating heavily at home. And I kept saying, we need a plan, we need a plan. And he's like, yes, I know, yes, I know. And yet he never came up with one, and we never sat down and talked about it. I think he was trying to avoid it, or just not wanting to realize that he might not be able to participate as much.
So, that's such a key element to all of this, because it sort of doesn't make any sense, right? Your dad, as you had told me earlier, went to great detail to make sure that his personal affairs were in order, but yet he didn't do it for the business. Do you suspect why that might be the case? Leslie, did you have a thought on that?
Well, my thought is that he just didn't want to share, and he didn't want to lose that ownership. And it was the only thing I feel that he felt like he had some kind of control over. That's how I envisioned it. I don't think that he was like, when I'm dead, I'm dead. He would say that every once in a while. So I think he thought, well, why should I worry about it? When I'm gone, I'm gone. Who cares? And obviously he didn't think about what was to come.
Right.
But that's what I think he thought. He was like, okay, I'll be dead and I don't care.
And I think Leslie's right on.
Yeah. So folks in the M&A Unplugged podcast community, if you're in a family business, or if you have a spouse or significant other or a family member that's in a family business, and there's no next generation that's going to come in and take over the business, so important to have a succession plan, and not only when you know there's maybe an imminent date on the calendar when that's going to have to be implemented, but life happens and things happen unexpectedly, and so there should always be a succession plan in case something were to happen to the person that's running the business day in and day out. And we're going to hear from Leslie and Wendi, what transpired then over the ensuing years to ultimately them, selling the business. So Wendi, what was it like? Because you were here, you were in the business day in and day out. What was it like after that moment, realizing that there was no plan in place, that you hadn't really run the business? Your dad had always made all the decisions, key decisions. What happened at that point in time in the business?
Well, I think that it kind of morphed into something else. It started out, that I was, a little daunted, of course, and a little bit overwhelmed, but I felt like, okay, I can get a hold of this until we sell. Because when he died, we had a meeting with Keith, and Keith, our attorney, suggested, all right, we sell. And at first I was really, really resistant. And Leslie was like, maybe we should. And then they kind of wooed me to the other side, saying, okay, I can't do this. So let's get this sold. But it obviously took some time to sell. And I was overwhelmed, and thank God that I had people behind me that knew what they were doing. My operations manager, my sales manager, and they knew what they were doing. So that helped me along with the processes until we sold.
Leslie, was there something you wanted to add there?
Well, before we went and we met with Keith, our attorney, we went to Wenesco and we told them that everything was going to remain the same. Everything is going to, nobody's going to lose their jobs. Everything was going to be fine. We're not going to change anything, because we thought that that's what we should do. This was before we even met with Keith. And then when we met with Keith and we were talking about Wenesco, first thing Wendi said was, oh no, we can't change anything. And then the more I thought about it, the more Joanne thought about it, who's our stepmom, my dad's wife, we thought about it and we said, Wendi, is this something that you want to do for the rest of your life? Is this what you want? And, after she thought about it for a while, at that point, that's when she decided that, what, you're right, let's put it up for sale. And that's when it started. We understood the process. Keith explained the process, that we need to get a company to, what is that? I can't think of the right word. It's something where you put a value on it. That's when we hired Sun Acquisitions and said, okay, here's our value. And that's, I think, where it started. And then as far as the running of the company, Wendi, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think
that's okay.
Your thing. But I just wanted to kind of preface it with that.
Understood. And so you got a value on the business, understood what the marketplace was like. You had great advice from a tremendous law firm and attorney who had been your dad's attorney for a very long time.
Yes.
And he's our cousin.
Our cousin.
And your cousin.
Yeah.
So it was in the family, and he was, and he was very concerned, obviously, on a personal level, to make sure that both of you and the business was taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to fast forward to the end, because I think it's important maybe to start there and then work our way back a little bit. You ultimately did find a buyer for the business.
Yes.
And the business was sold, and I believe it's in good hands today.
Yes.
And the business is carrying on, and your dad's legacy will hopefully carry on for many, many, many years. But it wasn't an easy journey. There were lots of starts and stops along the way, and issues that came up along the way, including some challenges with the business starting to decrease in value due to some operational issues, some sales issues, things related to that. So, and I know, Wendi, that was very hard on you personally, because you were here, living it every day and trying to hold it together while you're trying to sell the business. And Leslie was, doing her best to help from afar. But maybe the both of you can talk about, your personal journey. What did that look like from, The day that you walked in and said, okay, we're going to sell this, to the day that you actually did sell it, there were just a lot of challenges along the way. So maybe you can talk about some of those challenges.
And Leslie, please chime in, because there's things that I don't remember, and I actually ended up getting sick because of the stress and everything like that. But that's besides the point. When Dad died, everybody at the office thought, okay, for sure we're losing our jobs. So some people started looking for other jobs and other opportunities, which caused, especially my sales department, some absences, which did not help with the growth of the business. And we also had our controller being resistant to any change in making sure that the records were straight. So I think that was a challenge with some of the buyers as well, that our financials were kind of messed up because of this old antiquated system that we were using, that our controller was resistant in changing. Although we did try to make some changes near the end, and some of the people were right on board, and some of the people obviously were very resistant to that, which caused more trouble. We had a couple buyers that went through some of the processes to get it sold. However, they were put off by the numbers being a little bit skewed because of this old system.
What I'd like to say is that when we put it out in the market, we had a lot of interest. There were like maybe 5 different businesses that put in their an offer. There's another word for it. What is that called? The letter of intent.
Letter of intent. That's correct.
Yes. So, woo, yay, we're selling the business. We got all excited. Well, then you have to go through this process called, I forgot the name of the process.
Due
diligence. So I remember there was this list of things that had to be done, and they were sent to Wendi, and Wendi was looking at this list like, I have no idea what this says. I don't know what this means. What is all this stuff? And so we thought, well, if it's financial, then the person who does all of our books would know what to do with it. Well, he did and he didn't. He did some and he didn't. We also had some help from Joe, who also kind of led Wendi in the right path of, this is what you have to find. We also had to hire an accounting firm to help us decipher what some of the information was.
Mostly because of inventory. Our inventory was kind of messed up.
We were working in a system that was DOS based. So there was
very little ways to retrieve that information.
Nobody could figure it out. It was like, and so when somebody wants to go and buy a business and they see that you don't have any financials that make sense, why would they want to buy it? That's what we were facing with each and every time. And so then we decided, well, let's change our system and we'll go towards something that's Windows related, something that's a little bit more in the 21st century.
But that did not happen until like a year before we sold it. This was 2 years in that we made that decision.
And our controller didn't even want to explore the possibility of learning this. So he was fighting us
every step of the way.
And Wendi, you were imploring your dad along the way to put a plan in place. Did you sense even then that some of these things were going to be issues? Or were these even surprises to you as you got into the sales process?
I had a feeling, because of the DOS-based system, was going to be a trouble spot, because we always had, even though I knew it, it was complicated kind of getting around all the information that was in there to get to what you actually needed. Like, there was so many steps to take. Nothing was simple. So I had an inkling kind of in the back of my mind that if we needed to extract information, that it was going to be difficult.
Yeah, the good news here was that the business fundamentally it is a great business, right? There's a real need for what the company is doing worldwide. But the challenge was that your dad had so much of the information in his head that it wasn't operating properly without him now, and deciphering the financials and getting through the inventory were all significant challenges. And I think you started to see buyers disappearing. They were excited at first and then disappearing as they got into the deal, and good reliable financial reports could not be produced. Issues with inventory were popping up, and irregularities that caused buyers to get nervous. And folks in the M&A Unplugged podcast community, we always talk about the importance of having good financials, good information. It is so important to give buyers the comfort when you can produce information and have it tie out. The comfort level goes way up, the trust level goes way up, and the likelihood of getting the transaction done and done in a timely manner goes way up. And so these were just a few of the challenges that you were faced with, and then you found yourself in a situation where you were having to rebuild systems and invest money that you were not going to get back, because you're essentially doing it for the next owner. It's something you had to do in order to get people to get comfortable buying the business.
Right. That's exactly what happened. We ended up spending a lot of money just to be able to extract even some of that information with the old system, with the old system converting over to the new system. And that was only some of the information. Some of the information still had to be extracted from the old system. So dealing with that and then trying to sell the business, and then also, the grief of our father passing away was tough.
Right. So you're mourning. I mean, I think that's a great point. You're mourning passing of your dad, the patriarch of the family, in the midst of having to deal with all of this. There's no wonder that you were under so much stress.
Right. Exactly. Leslie was a huge help because she did everything she could to help ease my stress, and I appreciated that too, even though she lived far away.
Was the process harder? I mean, it sounds like it was, but was it harder than you'd even imagined it was going to be?
Yes.
The process of selling it?
Yes.
Yes. But only fault of Wenesco's, no fault of anybody else that was involved. Everybody else, our attorneys and Sun Acquisitions and the accounting firm that we hired, everybody was very supportive and sympathetic of our plight. But it was hard on us.
How many, do you remember how many potential buyers we had?
Yeah. I think it was 5.
Our recollection is you had a lot of potential buyers.
Potential buyers, yeah. But 5 did the due diligence, I think.
5 legitimate offers, but you had many more who expressed interest.
There was the buyer before the final buyer was kind of like the last straw in my mind. His offer was, I don't remember exact numbers. I don't think that really matters, but it was a small amount down. And then in 2 years, he was going to pay the rest of it. And we were like so desperate. We're thinking to ourselves, okay, we need to take this offer. We need to take this offer. And as I was thinking about it and thinking, okay, well, the guy is going to give us the rest of the money for the business in 2 years and he doesn't, what do we have to stand on? At that point, I said to Wendi and Joanne, forget it. We are not accepting this offer. We're going to run this business ourselves. And that was that was the day before he says, oh, I have another buyer for you, because that guy kind of fell to the wayside because we think that the whole thing was just, I don't know what he was doing, but he wasn't a serious buyer, even though he put us through this whole process. And I was ready to say, you know what? We'll make it work. We'll figure out a way to run this business. So that's kind of where I was, because we it was kind of like, at that point, we felt like we were giving it away.
Right, right.
Well, thankfully, and you're right. Thankfully, another buyer showed up, and you were able to then go ahead and complete that transaction. Let me ask you, because I think you've been so gracious coming on and talking about, what wasn't, really a good experience for both of you in so many ways. What advice would you offer to other children of parents who own businesses, or spouses whose significant other owns a business, who haven't put a succession plan in place? What would you offer up to people?
I would say first and foremost, get everything, the processes, not everything, but the processes in writing as much as you can. So at least you have something to follow. At least you have a guideline to follow. I wish that I had that. I wish I had, all right, then if this, then this, if this, then this, written down so I can take the steps to make sure that the business can at least move forward until we made a decision on what to do.
And another thing would be to take the people that are there to support you and embrace them and use them and ask a lot of questions. That was really helpful to us, between it felt like a family after a while between Sun Acquisitions and the attorneys. It was like you didn't feel like you were alone in it.
Right. You didn't feel like you were alone.
Because you had questions, and no questions were stupid questions. Because when you don't know what you're doing in your head, you're like, this is a stupid question. Of course, most people would know this, and you're thinking to yourself, no, I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to ask. And
right.
You feel like you don't know what you're talking about.
And nobody made us feel inadequate or anything like that.
Yeah, so that you need support. That's one thing you need, whether it's from your an outside team or your family team. But support is to ask questions and to ask for help. I think that would be a pretty good advice.
Well, you were thrust into a very difficult situation. It's hard enough for people to sell a business who have run it, their whole lives, let alone you being thrown into the mix here on the heels of your dad passing away, and then having to go through, what is a very tedious, long, detailed process. And, our hats are off to the two of you for going through that process and withstanding the test, because that was definitely a challenge. I wish it could have been different. I think you being on today's show is going to help, hopefully, a lot of people think about having a succession plan well in advance. And, thankfully, your dad's legacy is living on here and carrying on, and the business is moving forward and hopefully thriving.
Thankfully, yes. And some of the our employees got to keep their jobs too, which was because it was moved locally. So I'm happy about that. That was a huge concern of mine. I didn't want my guys to. I got close to them, and I didn't want them to lose their jobs. So it was really important that most of them got to keep them too.
Yeah, it becomes a family. Well, Wendi, Leslie, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this information with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
So for the M&A Unplugged podcast community, let me recap a few things that Wendi and Leslie brought up today that I think are so important to keep in mind. One is it's so critical to have a succession plan and to build that early on with your advisors, because life will happen, things will happen, and you want to know that the business is going to be taken care of, your employees, your clients, your family is going to be taken care of. It will help avoid so many things, including, as you heard Wendi mention, the stress that your family can be under. It's bad enough that they've lost a loved one, but now the stress of having to run and operate that business and maybe sell it can be an awful lot for people. And I think really two other so critical things are having an operations manual in place. Wendi talked about if she had something that she could refer to, that was a roadmap for how to run the business. It could have been such a big help and made such a big difference. And I often tell our clients, it really increases and enhances the value of a business. And having the right set of advisors. You really want to have the right group of people behind you that you trust and rely on. So I want to thank Wendi and Leslie again for being on today's show. All of today's information will be available in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the M&A Unplugged podcast. Until then, please remember that scaling, acquiring, or selling a business takes time, preparation, and the proper knowledge.
Thank you for joining us today on M&A Unplugged. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and recommend it wherever you get your podcasts. If you want more great information on how to scale, acquire, or sell a business, please visit our website at sunacquisitions.com.